was our next day off.
All right, so the notes today are about 6.2, and it is what's going on at home during World War I and the different groups that are impacted. This is kind of, I don't want to call it boring, but it's probably not what you think of when you think of World War I. And yet, this is what's mostly on the test, stuff like this, like what was happening at home. I don't ask you very much about warfare and weapons and stuff, the interesting stuff. So. All right, so the main thing you're going to look for today is how do different groups contribute at home, like women, African Americans, I think, and Mexican Americans. And the big idea today is a lack of labor, like people to work, because of the draft, created a lot of job openings and new opportunities for women and minorities. And on a totally separate note, to ensure support for the war, Congress and the Supreme Court kind of stepped on people's liberties. We'll look at that. So the United States is going to need soldiers, and so they're going to do something called conscription, which is forcing someone to fight in the military. Conscription is another word for the draft. And the law that they're going to pass to do this is called the Selective Service Act. And they're going to draft 2.8 million Americans. Not all soldiers were drafted, though. So 2 million were actually, they chose to voluntarily enlist. So this is a little propaganda encouraging people to volunteer for the war before the draft. They made it look like fun, like look at this poster. Gee, look at all the fun you're going to miss if you don't join the war. How exciting. Okay, African Americans during the war. 400,000 African Americans were drafted, but they served in racially segregated units, so they didn't serve among white people. Even though segregation was just happening in the South, the U.S. Army decided to segregate people, which is pretty controversial, pretty crazy. 42,000 of them served overseas, so that means most of them served at home. But their bravery was equal to anybody else, and they earned medals from their commanders. But the biggest impact that African Americans had on the war was actually at home in America, so we'll look at that. So this little note's kind of crazy. This was actually flown in airplanes by like German planes would fly and drop thousands of these little notes where the African Americans were fighting. Check out the note, it's kind of interesting. Hello boys, what are you doing over here? You're fighting the Germans? Why are you fighting us? We never did you any harm. Not like those white folk back in America that treat you all racist and they're bad to you. Germany's like better than that, and we're not mean, and you should stop fighting us. It's kind of interesting. It's also, on one hand, it's like Germany being manipulative. On the other hand, everything they're saying is kind of accurate. Back in America, America's rotten to you. Why are you fighting for a country that's being racist to you? It's kind of interesting that they dropped a bunch of these pamphlets on African American trenches. All right, women in the military. World War I is the first war in which women officially served. They are not going to be picking up guns and fighting, but they did fill a whole bunch of jobs like clerks, pharmacists, photographers, nurses. The nurses were the only women to go overseas during the war, so they're not going to send you overseas to be a photographer if you're a woman, but you did get sent overseas to be a nurse. Okay, so at home, The war, this is what we would call a total war. World War I and World War II were total wars. That means that everybody's life was impacted by the war, and certain items you couldn't buy anymore, like certain metals and things, because everything was being used for the war. So in 1917, they created something called the War Industries Board, and that would allow them to like coordinate the making of stuff for the war. Like a government agency created to coordinate the making of stuff for the war. And so they would tell car companies and stuff, stop building cars and start building planes or something. So the government became very controlling and involved, and part of this is through the War Industries Board. All right, back at home, they encouraged people to grow their own food in their own gardens, and they made propaganda posters for this. They called it Victory Gardens. Create your own victory garden, so in your backyard you could grow whatever, cabbage and squash and tomatoes, so that you were leaving more food for the troops and using less food for yourself from the stores. Also, the Fuel Administration encouraged people to conserve coal and oil. And check it out, this is relevant right now. Daylight savings time was introduced in order to save electricity. So we just had daylight savings time last night. And did you notice this morning it was way more sunny? You almost felt like, did I sleep in? You know, like you're going to school and it feels weird. That's because we changed the clock to take advantage of how many hours of daylight there are so that you're maximizing your daylight. You're not using as much power. Okay, how is America going to pay for the war? Back in the day, we don't do this very much today, but they did something called selling war bonds. Did you learn about war bonds in 10th grade? Okay. A war bond is like you giving the government a loan. So basically you pay like $500 and you get a little piece of paper from the government that says, we'll pay you back like in 5 years. And you gave us $500 now, so we'll give you like $520 in 5 years. Is it a good deal to get $20 5 years later? Not really. So it's not like people were loaning the money like, oh, I'm going to get rich. Why were people loaning the money then? Just, yeah, to show patriotism, to be supportive. Imagine if you're some 60-year-old dude and you want to help with the war effort, but you can't pick up a gun and go fight. Buying a war bond is a way that you can help. So we were able to raise $23 billion this way. We're going to do this again in World War II. So you need to be familiar with the phrases victory bonds and liberty bonds and what they were. It's like when people loan the government money. They don't get paid back very much, but it's a way for them to be patriotic. There's some more posters. Beat back the Hun with a liberty bond and back him up with a victory bond. Okay, women. Women played a big role in World War I. They're going to play a bigger role in World War II. Can you go to where it says on your notes, women supporting industry? And can you say they'll do even more in World War II? So they do a lot in World War I. They do even more in World War II. So women that never really worked before, the husband had always just worked and the woman stayed home. Women took positions at places where their husband used to work, like manufacturing and railroads and shipping. And so they filled in for their husbands kind of temporarily while the war was going on. When the war ends, though, you should kind of underline women will return to whatever they did before, or they will go back home. So this is not like a step forward in equality, because women are just expected, when the husband comes back, you need to quit your job and go back to the way things were. It's not until World War II where the men come back and the women are like, I kind of liked working. I kind of like equality. rather than staying home. But not right now. Now they are going to go back home. Here's a photograph of them making tires for cars for the war. Here's some ladies at a job receiving and delivery. Okay, so the war stopped the flow of immigrants coming into the United States, and that allowed African Americans to fill in a whole bunch of jobs. And they're going to do this by migrating. So a lot of African Americans live in the South, and they're going to move up to the north where all the industries are. What's the state where they build all the cars and stuff?
Michigan or Ohio?
Yeah, Michigan or Ohio. Detroit is in Michigan. So a whole bunch of African Americans from the South are going to move to the north, and this is called the Great Migration. It's all over our test, so I would highlight or circle the words Great Migration. It's the idea of African Americans moving from the South to the North. And so I would say African Americans' biggest impact in the war was in factories, building stuff, moving to the North and building supplies for the war. So this is just a little picture illustrating what I was saying, the areas they left and then the areas that they moved to. This is a picture of the train station in the South, people leaving, heading up north. Here's a picture of people loading up their cars so they can move north. Boop. All right, many Mexicans moved north also. And I guess what I mean, a lot of Mexicans came to America. Can you press the button again? Boop. Boop. So basically, they moved to the cities to take jobs, but I think they also did a whole lot of farming. So they provided a lot of labor on farms in the American Southwest. So they left Mexico, came to America because of a lot of new job opportunities. But they did face discrimination and hostility from Americans. So you remember, you have all these soldiers drafted, and then you have a bunch of open jobs that still need to be filled. People to farm, people to build stuff, and so African Americans, women, and Mexicans are going to fill in. Okay, we're coming near the end here. Let's talk about back at home and like limits on free speech. So they created something called the Committee on Public Information, and this was an agency that was set up to create like pro-war propaganda because they had to convince America that this was a war worth fighting. Some people were not in favor of the war, so they had to really like advertise it as something that we needed to do. Can you picture this? You would go to the movies or something, and somebody would actually get up there and stand in front before the movie started, and they would give a speech about like why the war was a good thing and why you should support it. So imagine being at the movie theater and somebody today was like, all right, we got soldiers in Iraq, they need your support, you know, like, and they give a big old speech. It'd be kind of weird. But that's what people did back then to try to convince you the war was a good idea. There was this great fear of espionage. Espionage is spying. Oh, boop, boop, boop. There you go. Espionage is spying to obtain information. And so they started to pass laws that were kind of overly strict, maybe. A big one that we're going to look at together later is they passed the Sedition Act that made it illegal to criticize the president or the government. You couldn't say, like, this is a dumb war and we shouldn't fight it and the president's stupid, Wilson's dumb for fighting this. They could throw you in jail for that, which is pretty crazy. So during wartime, we notice in America that free speech is often limited. They limit your free speech, and the Sedition Act is a way that they did that. All right, so a lot of people were suspicious of each other, and they were suspicious of anybody that had German ancestry, anybody that was German or had German roots. And this led to some anti-German feelings. I know the other day we learned they banned Beethoven and they called hamburgers. What did they call hamburgers? I don't think it was that, was it? What was it? Liberty steak? Something like that? Yeah. They took away German classes in college and stuff. So anybody appearing disloyal came under attack. And it was easy to kind of single out German people. In my AP government class, we talk about this case, Schenck versus the United States. It was a Supreme Court case. This guy was giving out pamphlets that were like, don't join the draft is evil. You shouldn't be fighting for this country. And then he went to jail because of that Sedition Act. And then he's like, I shouldn't be in jail. And the case went to the Supreme Court. So they listened to his side of the story. Should he be in jail? Should he not? They decided he should be in jail. Because if the words that you are saying out loud are clear and present danger to other people, then you don't have free speech. So what's an example of free speech that you don't have today?
Oh, cyberbullying.
Okay, cyberbullying is being dangerous to someone else. Ryan, what'd you say? Yelling fire in like this classroom or in a crowded movie theater where people might trample over each other and kill each other and there's no fire. So if you say something that creates a danger, then you don't have free speech. And they said that this guy, by saying like, don't get drafted, being drafted is stupid, that he was creating a danger. So it's kind of an interesting case. So there is a group called the ACLU. They're on a few of my tests, so I want to make sure that they were on the notes. The ACLU was formed. It's like a group of people that are really in favor of your rights, like the Bill of Rights. And they were formed to protect people's rights. They'll give you a lawyer. Like, for instance, they provided a lawyer to Schenck for free on his behalf because they agreed with what he was fighting for. So. Okay, so go down to your summary and tell me, for your summary, tell me about 3 groups at home and how they help with the war effort. 3 groups at home and how they help with the war effort. If that means you have to do more than 2 sentences, then so be it. And then go back and answer all your questions. We still have 15, 16 minutes till the bell rings. So I think we can get this stamped and we can get our study guide stamped. And that means we've almost stamped every single thing in our notebook.